In an era when environmental and social governance, or ESG, is a key metric for business and charities, one measure of success is the ability to track the impact of programs and funding. Now, an Australian-backed startup is doing just that here and around the world with a variety of companies and not-for-profits.
Think about the lockdown days of COVID. Lonely days for many people, socially isolated. But one company, Socialsuite, created a free program to allow organisations to monitor the impact on their people. More than 1,000 signed up in a matter of weeks. It is a classic example of environmental and social governance. But the concept of ESG goes much further for companies. While ESG reporting is voluntary in Australia, India, Hong Kong and New Zealand have made it mandatory. The UK and US are moving that way too. Here, around 20% of the top 200 listed companies report ESG as part of their annual report. Smaller companies are also starting, like junior explorer Latin Resources, which focuses on minerals that contribute to net zero emissions, like lithium and halloysite.
We started to review and look at the ESG policies of other companies, and we thought, why can't we bring that into mining, especially into exploration, which we'll explore it. We looked at the format. We actually now report. We actually put our first quarterly report out in December, and that's based around, the World Economic Forum format.
But ASX-listed companies have another obligation: continuous disclosure of information to shareholders. In other words, if there are matters in their environmental and social governance that might impact shareholders, they have a legal obligation to let them know.
What we see happening globally is really a big movement about how investors and markets look at business performance. Traditionally, the yardstick was always, what's the bottom line? What are the financials of a company? But today there is that additional element where investors look at, well, what are the non-financial metrics and information of a business? So really on ESG, how is a company operating and being governed in a responsible and transparent way?
It's a difficult situation moving the mining sector into that area of ESG because, people think of us as pulling, materials out of the ground, using all types of chemicals to create and build and develop those minerals. But for us, it's an educational process for, as you said earlier, the ESG funds for the average investor, which, everyone's 100% across now what's happening to the environment, no more than here in Australia. So it's important that we ran through that. But I think the bigger job we have is educating the market that mining's not all about, using cyanide and chemicals.
For many companies, especially small and medium-sized businesses, the concept of ESG reporting can seem daunting.
Well, we see that small and medium-sized companies really are struggling now. They don't know how to start that ESG journey. They think that environmental social governance is quite an overwhelming area. And that's right. If you go online and do a quick search, there is so much information there. It seems very time-consuming. It seems complex. It feels like you don't have the expertise in-house there, and it looks very expensive.
Despite those barriers, smaller companies can see sense in this reporting if it is efficient because of the way they are viewed as they seek to raise capital in the future.
The Geo40 was formed around about a decade ago with this idea that we could recover minerals out of geothermal fluid. And so geothermal fluids, if you think about a hot spring, the silky texture of the water is silica, and there's a whole range of minerals in geothermal fluid. So nature's doing this work underground where it's dissolving these minerals out of the rock, and they're sitting in those fluids. So when we generate power in geothermal power stations, we're using the heat in that fluid, but nothing else. So Geo40 was formed with this idea that it must be possible to grab hold of these minerals out of these fluids. And that's exactly what we do. We recover strategic minerals out of geothermal fluids. So there's been enormous focus in recent times, in terms of green investing and sustainable investing. And while we were doing all those things, it's becoming much more important that it's discoverable and done formally. And so this is, I guess, for us, it's part of the business, our business growing up.
For companies large and small, the pressure to report properly to key stakeholders is increasingly important.
ESG reporting is for everyone, for every industry, but we mostly see it's in that small and mid-size element that our companies are struggling. The larger companies have been in sustainability for a long time, and we hear from customers we work with, from CEOs and CFOs, that before they got onto that ESG journey, they felt that pressure, they felt the urgency, and literally some of them have said to us, that was what's keeping me up at night. The idea that I need to return an ESG survey to someone in the supply chain, an investor is asking me for ESG metrics, but I don't know where to start. Can you help me get there to a point where I actually have something tangible in my hands to show investors?
But as government and more customers want to know how their suppliers are sourcing and creating products, the pressure to report will keep rising, even in areas such as digital finance. Cryptocurrency players are now conscious of reporting, especially with concerns around the amount of electricity used to generate new coins and tokens.
You really can now buy green Bitcoin if that's what you wanted to have in your portfolio, and I think that's something that Elon Musk was wanting to see. And hopefully those concerns will be addressed soon enough, and people can buy their Teslas with Bitcoin.
For all these companies, the reasons for reporting on their ESG are different. That's because various stakeholders will have different priorities, but that is also why transparency about practices and corporate policies will be increasingly important for all companies.
The first one is about accessing capital, and that's really demonstrating that you're doing something there, you've got your report, you've got your non-financial disclosures. But there's things that are coming really now, that is looking at regulation and compliance. Risk management is important. Then there is investor relations and information flow to really proactively get the information out there around how you responsibly report and operate your business. We're also looking at reputation and branding at large, driving profitability and growth to some really key opportunities around ESG, and having measurable achievements. And that's when companies might already be reporting on some high-level United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but they can't really demonstrate how they are impacting those goals. And with ESG reporting, you're getting really a lot closer to demonstrating that impact you have. So there's a lot to leverage there, but you need to start that journey, ideally today, to get ready to leverage and really get that value out of ESG.